Centuries ago, a poet composed verses so vivid that he transformed a dark, rolling monsoon cloud into a living messenger of love. His name was Kalidasa, and his work remains the benchmark for classical Sanskrit literature. Yet the legend of his youth describes a man with almost no grasp of the world around him. He was supposedly discovered deep in a forest, hacking away at the exact tree branch he was sitting on. The transition from a mocked village outlier to the most celebrated figure in the history of the language is the central mystery of his life. The shift begins with Princess Vidyotama. She was intellectually formidable, possessing an exhaustive knowledge of the scriptures and a history of defeating every scholar who challenged her to a debate. Embittered by their loss, a group of scholars sought to humble her. They searched for a man they could use as a pawn, and they found their target in the man cutting the branch. They dressed the uneducated man in the robes of a master and presented him to the court under a forced vow of silence. When the princess raised one finger during their debate, the man raised two. The scholars translated these basic hand gestures into complex philosophical arguments, successfully convincing Vidyotama to marry him. On their wedding night, the deception failed. Startled by the sound of a wild animal, the man spoke in a rough, uneducated dialect that immediately betrayed his true background. Realizing the scholars had tricked her, Vidyotama cast him out of the palace with a public insult. That night destroyed his false identity. Stripped of the silk robes and the scholars' protection, he was forced to confront his own lack of knowledge for the first time. He faced two paths. He could return to the life of a village outcast, or he could attempt to bridge the gap between his current state and the man the scholars had pretended he was. He chose to leave home and seek an education. Popular tradition says he traveled to a temple of the goddess Kali. His devotion was so intense that the goddess granted him instantaneous wisdom. However, looking at this ancient Sanskrit manuscript reveals a different story. This is a language built on highly technical structures of grammar, syntax, and meter. Mastering it requires a conscious, methodical effort that no single moment of inspiration can replace. The transformation required years of study. He used the memory of his public rejection to fuel his education, mastering the very academic system that had once been used to mock him. The court scholars possessed technical knowledge, but they lived isolated lives. Kalidasa had spent his youth in the wild, giving him an observation-based understanding of the natural world, weather patterns, and animal behavior. When he finally combined this lived experience with the technical precision of Sanskrit grammar, he created a style that the academic elite could not replicate. In his work Meghadutam, he used his knowledge of the monsoon cycle to turn a cloud into a vehicle for human longing. It was a fusion of meteorology and poetry. These palm leaf manuscripts preserve the historical weight of his compositions, including his play Abhignana-Shakuntalam, which pushed Sanskrit storytelling into new psychological depths. He took the language used by the men who tricked him and filled it with raw human emotion. The scholars who used him as a punchline were forgotten, while Kalidasa became the primary author of his era. Modern historians continue to debate the exact timeline of his life, generally placing him between the 3rd and 5th century CE, often linked to the court of King Vikramaditya. While the historical details remain blurry, the texts provide evidence that this level of intellectual growth is a human possibility. When a society assigns a person a label like fool or uneducated, that label only functions as a destiny if the individual accepts it. Before he wrote a single line of epic poetry, Kalidasa rebelled against the social role he had been assigned. He rewrote his own identity before he ever attempted to rewrite the scriptures. If you feel you are starting from a deficit or that others have already decided your potential, you are exactly where Kalidasa began. A poor starting point does not dictate the finish line, provided there is a persistent hunger to acquire the tools you currently lack. Your life changes the moment you stop believing the world's opinion of you and decide that knowledge will be the tool you use to change it.